Hi there, I'm Drew Badger, the world's #1 English fluency guide, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to another advanced listening practice lesson. Today we are going to talk about hobbies and how to express yourself and how to just describe hobbies that you have, and we'll use some general language and just give you a few basic and maybe some more intermediate and advanced things as well you can use when you're just talking about yourself and what you enjoy doing. So in this video, for these examples, I'll be talking about, let's see, what will I talk about? I'll talk about Japanese gardening because that's one of my hobbies and it's something that I don't really get the chance to do it right now, but we can weave that into the conversation as well. To weave something in, just like you're weaving some clothing. When you weave something into a conversation, it's a way of entering something or putting something inside of a conversation, so bringing up a particular topic. Anyway, so I'll be talking about that, and let's get started. Well, I wanted to talk about hobbies just because this is another requested video that people are asking about. People want to know how to express themselves in different situations, and talking about your hobbies is one of them. Now, just in kind of a general thing before we talk about hobbies specifically, and even Japanese gardening more specifically, most of the time when you can focus on a particular thing, like a particular topic or a particular grammar point, whatever that is, if you can focus on it and master that one particular thing, it will make it much easier for you to then transition to other things. Because what I really like to explain to people, and I'll just give another quick review of it now, is that the English language, or any language itself, doesn't get increasingly difficult. So basically, you get to a point kind of like a tree, and I give this example a lot, but you start out learning basic grammar and then more intermediate and even advanced grammar, but it doesn't get increasingly difficult after that. You basically just learn more topics. So if you can learn how to say, I feed the cat, then you can learn how to say, I feed whatever other animal it is. It's just a matter of learning different vocabulary, and then you're learning maybe some kind of expressions and things like that, but really the language itself doesn't get more difficult. So that's the nice thing about learning a new language. If you can focus on one thing in particular, like learning how to describe one hobby, then it makes it easier to describe other hobbies or even just other things in general that are using the same kind of format in the way we describe things. So just talking about my interest in gardening. So this began, maybe you know this story about me. Maybe you don't if you haven't been following me for a while. Actually, I don't know if I've told this story or not. But so when I was about, I forget what age, maybe I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, I went to a garden, a Japanese garden behind the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where I grew up, and it was called, or maybe still is called, in fact, if it's still there, Osaka Garden. And I went there and I was supposed to do, I think, some kind of project or drawing thing, but I just sat there and just looked at the garden for, I don't know, 2 hours or whatever it was. My teacher was a little bit upset that I didn't actually do the assignment, but she was happy that I found something that was, I don't know, entertaining for me, because I'm typically all over the place and interested in many different things. So it was kind of my way of focusing. I found something I was interested in. So this is kind of the origin story of how you get into something, and this is part of explaining hobbies. So I wanted to just do it in a native way so you can get kind of the feel of it and maybe the expressions you might use when you're introducing something. So just like explaining an everyday object or talking about your family or your personal life or your job, when you're explaining something, there are lots of different angles that you can approach that thing from. So you can talk about why you do it, or when you started doing it, what the origin of that thing is, just like I described. Or you can talk about maybe the reason for hopefully you're doing it in the future to accomplish something else. So actually, I'd like to open up traditional Japanese inns in the future, and that's kind of related to what I want to do. So maybe that's kind of talking about the end or like the later stages of where the hobby may go. So again, I just described going into the hobby, why I got interested in it. So I'm talking about Japanese gardens in particular, and now I can get maybe a bit more specific about, like, I started studying bonsai. So this is the like little trees in a pot, and people often call them bonsai trees, but the word bonsai actually means tree in a little pot. So we're talking about something in a little pot itself. So we've got, it's kind of like it's a redundant. You don't need to say bonsai tree. You can just say bonsai if people know what you're talking about. Also, like having learned the correct pronunciation since I've come to Japan, bonsai, instead of like bonsai, which is actually a different thing in Japan when people put their hands up like bonsai. It's kind of like hooray, like congratulations, that kind of thing. Aren't we all excited? Anyway, so then like here I'm adding a little bit of maybe some trivia, some interesting facts about my hobby or something that people might not know, and just giving them a little bit more information about it. So we move from the origin story, talking about something, to getting a little bit more into maybe why I'm interested in it, or giving some maybe interesting pieces of information just to share that knowledge with other people. Maybe they're interested in knowing more about that, maybe they aren't. But you can talk about like on a particular day, this is what I do within that hobby. Again, like all of this is kind of assuming that the people we're speaking with are interested in learning more about what we do. So if they are not really paying attention, or they don't really care, or they're not asking us questions, then you don't have to worry about any of this. But assuming they are interested in what you have to say, really you're just kind of using these different things I'm explaining now as things you can bring up in the conversation. So if they say, oh, how long have you been doing that? You can say something simple like, oh, I've been playing baseball for 5 years. I've been playing soccer for 5 years. I've been playing tennis for 10 years. I've been gardening for 20 years, or whatever that is. But you can always give a little bit more information, and this is how you develop fluency. So you can, especially for the people that maybe you know what you want to say, but when you start speaking, you're like, I can't, like it just escapes you. Your words don't actually come out. So in those situations, it's good to have some kind of templates, some basic things you can say just to get the momentum moving when you start speaking. Because you'll find that once you start opening your mouth and a few words start to come out, if you just keep letting that flow, even if it's not flowing properly, you start getting the better flow, the more natural flow of the words that are coming out. So now I can talk about maybe a particular instance, something I did when I was gardening. So one of the reasons I became interested in it is because I enjoyed just Japanese garden design. I thought it was really interesting. So here I'm talking about the reasons why I'm interested in it. So it was something very different from what I saw in America, where we would have lots of maybe flower beds. And these flower beds and other things like that are meant to be viewed from the outside of the house. So kind of in America, it's a lot more for your neighbor than for yourself when you're designing these kinds of gardens. But in Japan, it's the opposite. So often you'll be walking around and you'll see maybe concrete fences or other fences around people's homes. But if you get beyond that fence, you've got the garden surrounding the home. And typically the garden is meant to be viewed from the inside of the house. So after you've finished your hard day of work, you can sit down, relax, and enjoy looking at the garden from the inside of the house. So these are just, again, more bits of trivia about Japanese gardening. Maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, but I'm just giving these as example things so you can explain things more about whatever your hobby is. So now we can talk about, like, again, a specific maybe day in the life. Maybe a person asks you a question like, oh, what's it like to do whatever that thing is? So especially if you have maybe an interesting hobby or an interesting job that people don't know much about. So maybe if I am I'm like a stunt driver or something like that. So I drive a car and I do other interesting stunts for movies, and people maybe think that's cool, but they don't know much about it. They can say, oh, what's that like? Or what do you do as a stunt driver? And then you can describe more specific things about whatever it is you do. Excuse me. So in my case, a typical day, usually what I would be doing, I don't really do this so much anymore, but when I was doing more gardening, I came out to Japan. I couldn't get a visa to actually do gardening. So here's like a bit more of like my personal story rather than just trivia about gardening in general. But I couldn't get a visa to do that, so I decided to teach English. That was the only way really I could come to Japan easily. So that's what I did. And when I came to Japan, I started doing the gardening learning on the side. So on the side, this is another great phrase you can use, on the side. Whether you have a hobby that's on the side, or you have a job, or something that's kind of next to or supplementing your actual job or the main thing that you do. So while I was doing teaching professionally, that's what I actually did. I did gardening on the side. So I was lucky enough to find a Japanese gardening teacher. He's a really great guy, and I still talk with him, and he's just a really great teacher. He was able to help me learn a lot about that and learn even more, go deeper into it, and I developed even more interest in the hobby as a result. So I was talking with him about that. And on kind of a typical day, maybe we would be either building a new garden or we would be maintaining one. And so now I can talk more specifically about either one of these or both of them. Again, it just depends on what the other person you're speaking with is interested in. But if they are interested, then you can get more detail. But typically we're waiting to tell more about ourselves until we're getting that feedback from somebody else. And if they aren't really paying attention to what we're saying, either we're not telling a good enough story about what we're saying, or maybe it's just not that interesting. So it could be interesting to you, but again, you have to make sure that the other person actually cares about what you're listening to, or what you're saying, I should say. Otherwise, it's not really a conversation. Anyway, so just kind of the final thing I'll mention about this is you can talk about specifically, again, like why you're interested in the topic or the hobby or how long you're doing it. But you can also talk about how it makes you feel. So you can say, wow, I really enjoy gardening because I'm like highly affected by my personal surroundings or my personal space, my environment. So if it's a cloudy day, I tend to feel a little bit more sad. And if it's a sunny day, I tend to feel a little bit more happy. So in those cases, like for that reason, I enjoy, interior design in general, and I also enjoy gardening design. So I like to shape the environment around me so that I can control my own mood more. And I notice that when I'm in certain places, I feel more calm and relaxed, and in other places I feel, maybe I'm a bit more anxious, something like that. Again, these are just examples of things you can say, but the point is that when you focus on a particular thing like your hobby, you're learning more about the particular vocabulary for that hobby, but you can also talk about your origin story, how you feel about that thing, what your plans are for the future, what you do on an everyday kind of basis for that thing. And all this information will help you be able to express yourself much more. And once you can do it more about your hobbies, you can do it also as well about your jobs. So you can talk about, in this very same video, we could do the exact same thing about work. So, I became a teacher, and the reason I became a teacher is this. And as a teacher in my day-to-day life, I do this, and, the same kind of thing. So describing your job or describing your hobby or anything else that's just an everyday thing you do. What do you do as a parent? What do you do as a local coach for the basketball team? What do you do, as a salesman or like a trainer for a particular, maybe you're like a zookeeper. It doesn't matter what you are, but in these kinds of things that we discuss, these are the typical things that we're having conversations about. We want to know how we feel about it. Why are you doing that thing? We want to understand each other. And these are the kinds of things you can communicate when you're explaining your hobby or anything else. Well, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to learn about some other things, maybe related to this or even not related to this, I'm happy to speak more about that if it will give you some interesting vocabulary that you can use in your everyday life. But if you have enjoyed it, do like this video, do become a subscriber to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and be sure to tell a bunch of people about this video if you have not, so they can also enjoy this video and learn some more about how to describe their hobby or their job or other things that are related to that. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. To continue learning, click on the link in this video to download Speak English Naturally, our free guide to speaking and sounding like a native English speaker. The guide reveals the 3 most important kinds of conversational English you must learn if you want to sound native, and will help you experience instant improvement in your fluency and speaking confidence. To download your free guide on a mobile device, click on the link in the upper right of this video. To download your free guide from a computer, click on the link in the lower right of this video. I look forward to seeing you in the guide.